Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be going over some commonly made mistakes when managing state within a React application. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to limit my discussion to functional components and the useState React hook. However, these same concepts will also apply to React class components. So let's jump into the examples. The first mistake I'll be going over is modifying the state variable directly as opposed to using the setState portion of the useState hook. In this example, we have two objects, Fido and Tucker, which both represent different dogs. As you can see, each object has a name, a breed, and a URL to an image associated with it. In our React component, we use the useState hook in order to initialize the dog state to Fido. Next, we define a function to toggle the dog being displayed between Tucker and Fido. If the dog equals Fido, then we set dog to Tucker, otherwise we set dog to Fido, and then either way we log the new dog's name. Lastly, we return the JSX, which returns an image, a name, and a breed, all based on the dog variable, and we also set up the image to toggle the dog when you click it. So let's see what that looks like. When I load up the page, I see the image, the name, and the breed of the dog as expected. So let's see what happens when we click on the image. I'm clicking on the image, however nothing's changing on the screen. If I open the dev console, I can see that the new dog is changing. So the variable is changing, however React is not re-rendering. Why is that? In order for React to re-render, a setState function needs to be called. From the React docs, setState is a function that schedules an update to a component state object. When state changes, the component responds by re-rendering. So let's try that out. As you can see, I've made a couple modifications to the component. In addition to pulling off the dog variable from the useState hook, I'm now also pulling off the setState variable and naming it setDog. In the toggle dog function, instead of calling dog equals Tucker or dog equals Fido, we're now using the setDog function in order to trigger a re-render within React. So let's see that in action. When I load up the web page, the image, the name, and the breed is loaded again as expected, and now when I click on the image, it toggles back and forth between the two dogs. Now that we've gone over the solution to the issue, I'm going to give you a quick tip on how to avoid this in the future. As a general rule of thumb, React state should never be modified directly. Instead, you should use the setState function to update state. Because React state shouldn't be modified directly, I recommend making a habit of declaring state variables as the ES syntax const as opposed to a var or let. Depending on your project configuration, your compiler will likely give you a warning or error when trying to reassign the variable. In my case, I'm using the default create React app configuration, which is giving me warnings when I try to assign the dog to a new variable. The next mistake I'll be going over is calling the setState function on the current state variable, even if the properties on it have changed. What I mean will become more clear as we get into the example. In this example, we have the same basic structure with the image, the name, and the breed of the dog. However, we also add a new input which allows you to rename the dog. In our React component, we initialize two states. The first is dog, and like the last example, has a name, breed, and image. And the second is name, which represents the text within the input field, which allows you to rename the dog. Next, we define a function to set the name of the dog to the name that's inside the text field. So we say dog.name equals name, and then we call setDog on dog. Finally, we return the JSX. As before, we have the image, name, breed, and now we have the input field, which is controlled by the name variable. We also have a button, which when you click, calls the rename dog function. So let's test this out. I'm going to try to rename the dog to Tucker, and when I click rename, nothing is happening. The problem is that in React, when you call setState, before triggering a re-render, React first checks to see if the value of the previous state and the value of the new state are equivalent, and if they are, then it chooses to skip the re-rendering entirely. And that's the issue we're running into here. As you can see, we're updating the name property on dog, but when we call setDog, the object we're passing in is actually the same reference as the one we had in the previous state. So React chooses not to re-render the component. In order to make sure we trigger a re-render, we need to call setDog on a brand new object as opposed to on the same dog object it is currently. To do this, we're going to use a little bit of ES6 syntax. We're going to call setDog, and we're going to pass it an object. We're going to use the spread operator to inherit all properties from the dog object. And then we're going to overwrite the name to the current value of the text field. So now let's test this out. I'm going to try again to rename the dog to Tucker. And when I click rename, it's renamed properly. The last mistake I'm going to go over in this video is initializing state to a prop and then expecting the state to update anytime the prop does. I'll go into more example in a minute. This page is kind of a combination of the past two examples. As before, we have the image, the name, and the breed of the dog, and we have an input box to rename the dog, which is working properly. We also have a toggle dog button, which when clicked is supposed to toggle the dog between Tucker and Fido, as in the first example. However, this isn't working properly right now, and I'll go into that in a minute. Looking at the code, we have two components. The first is child component, which is identical to the finished product of the last example, with the only difference being that it initializes the state to a value of props.dog as opposed to the const of Fido. The second component is parent component, which initializes the state of dog to Fido and then passes dog to child component as a prop. It also renders the toggle dog button, which is currently not working. So why isn't the child component responding to changes in props.dog? The problem is that when you call useState, the initial value that you pass it is only used for the initial render, and from there on out, the state is completely managed by the setState function returned by the useState function. I'm going to propose two separate solutions to this problem. 9 times out of 10, I would consider maintaining duplicate state in this manner a code smell, and would recommend consolidating the state into one place inside of the parent component. Then you can pass in any references to the state in as props to the child component. This strategy is known as hoisting. Implementing this required changes in two places. In the parent component, as opposed to only passing in the dog prop, we are also now passing in the setDog function as a prop to the child component. And within child component, we're no longer maintaining a state for dog, we're pulling dog and setDog both off of props. By doing this, we're maintaining state in the same place, and when we call setDog within the parent component, the child component will also respond to those changes. And now if I reload the page, the toggle dog button is now working as intended, and if you try to rename the dog, it will still work. As I said before, maintaining state in both the child and parent component seems like a code smell to me, at least 9 times out of 10. But, that being said, if you really do need to maintain the state in both the child and parent component, there is a way you can achieve that using the useEffect hook. In order to accomplish this, I added a useEffect hook, which calls setDog on props.dog anytime props.dog changes. This means that the dog state and child component will always be up to date with props.dog. And now we can see if we reload the page, the toggle dog button is working properly, as is the rename button. Anyways guys, those are the 3 most commonly made mistakes I've seen when using React State. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one.